Today, we're diving into the major injustices within the Illinois prison system. And look, I know what you're thinking. I just finished my third bag of family-sized Tostitos and settled in for a relaxing evening of scrolling through TikToks of people power washing their driveways. Do I really need to hear about the horrors of the Illinois prison system right now? And to that I say, buckle up, because unfortunately, this is some seriously messed up stuff. From racial disparities to inadequate healthcare, these issues are deeply rooted and require urgent attention. This isn't just about statistics. It's about real people trapped in a system that often feels more focused on punishment than rehabilitation. It's about the human cost of neglect, indifference, and frankly, cruelty.
Let's address the stark reality in Illinois prisons. The number of Black individuals in Illinois prisons is, to put it mildly, staggering. Black people are disproportionately represented behind bars, and it's not because they're committing more crimes. This isn't a coincidence. It's a direct result of systemic racism that infiltrates every stage of the criminal legal system. From racially biased policing practices to harsher sentencing for similar offenses, the system is rigged against Black people from the start. Consider this. A Black man in Illinois is almost 7 times more likely to be incarcerated than a white man. Let that sink in for a moment. This isn't just a statistic. It's a reflection of a deeply flawed system that perpetuates cycles of poverty, trauma, and despair within Black communities. We're talking about a system where implicit bias can mean the difference between a second chance and a life sentence. This isn't just a problem, it's a moral crisis.
Now, let's talk about living conditions. Because if you thought racial disparities were bad, wait till you hear about the state of Illinois prisons themselves. Picture this. Cramped cells, overflowing with twice as many people as they were designed to hold. Mold creeping up the walls, barely functioning plumbing, and temperatures that swing from sweltering to freezing. This isn't a scene from a dystopian novel. It's the everyday reality for thousands of incarcerated individuals in Illinois. The overcrowding is so severe that basic human needs like hygiene, privacy, and even just finding a place to sleep become luxuries. And let's not forget the constant threat of violence that comes with packing people together like sardines in a can. These conditions aren't just unpleasant, they're downright dangerous, both physically and mentally. The lack of space and privacy breeds tension, leading to increased violence among those incarcerated. We're talking about a breeding ground for disease, despair, and recidivism. It's inhumane, it's counterproductive, and frankly, it's a lawsuit waiting to happen.
But wait, there's more. Because as if overcrowding and inhumane living conditions weren't bad enough, let's add a dash of woefully inadequate healthcare to the mix. We're talking about a system where getting a routine checkup feels like winning the lottery, and where serious medical conditions often go ignored until it's too late. Think about it. You're locked up, stripped of your freedom, and entirely dependent on the state for your basic needs, including healthcare. Now imagine that the state just doesn't care. That's the reality for far too many incarcerated individuals in Illinois, who are denied even the most basic medical attention. We're talking about preventable deaths because medical conditions were left untreated. It's a shameful indictment of a system that claims to prioritize rehabilitation, while simultaneously denying people the basic care they need to survive, let alone thrive.
Chapter 4. Torture by Isolation. Solitary confinement in Illinois. Now, let's talk about solitary confinement, shall we? Imagine being locked in a cell the size of a parking space, 23 hours a day, with little to no human contact. It's as close to psychological torture as you can get. Condemned by human rights organizations, yet common in Illinois prisons. Often used for arbitrary reasons. Talking back. Too many stamps, suspected gang affiliation. Even people convicted of crimes deserve basic human dignity. The psychological effects are well documented. Anxiety, depression, paranoia, hallucinations, suicidal thoughts.
Chapter 5. Bars to Hope Parole System Failures in Illinois. Now let's talk about the Illinois parole system, which, spoiler alert, is about as fair and effective as a screen door on a submarine. It's supposed to be a system that offers a second chance, a way for people who have served their time to return to society and rebuild their lives. But in reality, it's more like a rigged game show where the odds are always stacked against you. Imagine this. You've served your time, completed every program, jumped through every hoop, and finally, your parole hearing arrives. You're nervous, hopeful, but mostly you're ready for a second chance. But then you walk into the room and see a panel of strangers who seem to have already made up their minds. That's the reality for countless individuals in Illinois who are denied parole for reasons that often seem arbitrary, biased, or just plain cruel.
Chapter 6. Sentencing juveniles to die in prison, excessive sentencing, and juvenile injustice. Okay folks, brace yourselves, because this next chapter is particularly tough to stomach. We're talking about excessive sentencing, juvenile prison abuses, a toxic cocktail of draconian laws, and a fundamental misunderstanding of how young people develop. Illinois has a nasty habit of handing out sentences that are so long, they make geological time look like a quick nap. We're talking mandatory minimums that tie judges' hands and leave them with no choice but to impose sentences that are often wildly disproportionate to the crime. But it gets worse. Remember those incredibly long sentences I mentioned? Well, sometimes they're given to children. Yes, you heard that right, children. In Illinois, it's entirely possible for a teenager to be tried as an adult and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The adolescent brain is wired differently than an adult brain. We've talked about overcrowding, inadequate health care, abusive solitary confinement, and draconian sentencing laws. But there's still a fundamental problem: the lack of meaningful opportunities for education and rehabilitation. The goal is to rehabilitate individuals to return to society. How can we expect change when the system offers little more than idleness and despair? There's a severe lack of educational programs, vocational training, and job skills development. We've talked about the injustices faced by those incarcerated within the Illinois prison system, but it's crucial to remember that this system is also failing those who work within its walls. We're talking about correctional officers, often overworked, underpaid, and operating in incredibly stressful and dangerous environments. Now, I'm not here to make excuses for bad behavior, but it's essential to understand the context in which this misconduct occurs. When you have a system that's stretched thin, understaffed, and poorly managed, it creates an environment where abuse can thrive. And thrive, it does. We're talking about reports of physical abuse, excessive use of force, sexual assault, and retaliation against incarcerated individuals. Now, to be fair, not all correctional officers are corrupt.
Imagine you've served your time in an Illinois prison and are ready to return to society. You've paid your debt and are ready for a fresh start. But returning to society is like navigating a minefield with a blindfold on. Every step is fraught with challenges. Every door seems to slam shut. Housing restrictions make it nearly impossible to find a place to live, and limited employment opportunities leave many feeling hopeless.
We've covered a lot of ground, haven't we? From racial disparities and inhumane conditions to inadequate health care and a broken parole system, the Illinois Department of Corrections has a lot to answer for. But here's the thing. Getting answers from IDOC is about as easy as extracting teeth from a rabid badger. We're talking about a system that's notoriously opaque, accountable to seemingly no one. They operate in the shadows, with little oversight or transparency, free to continue their reign of neglect and abuse with seemingly no consequences. Think about it. Who's watching the watchers? Who's holding the Illinois Department of Corrections accountable for the litany of horrors that occur within their facilities? The answer, sadly, is no one. At least, not effectively. There have been calls for an independent body to oversee IDOC, a body with the power to investigate complaints, hold bad actors accountable, and force meaningful change within the system. Look, I know this has been a lot to process. It's heavy stuff, and it's easy to feel overwhelmed and helpless in the face of such systemic injustice. But here's the thing. We can't afford to look away. We can't become numb to the suffering happening behind those prison walls. Addressing these injustices requires systemic reform, including reducing prison populations, improving healthcare, expanding educational and rehabilitative programs, implementing fair parole practices, and increasing transparency and accountability. By shedding light on these issues, by demanding better from our elected officials, by supporting organizations working tirelessly for reform, we can create a system that truly prioritizes justice, fairness, and human dignity for all.